In today's episode, we discuss the difficulties of being a woman in high powered corporate America, transmuting weaknesses into strength, the importance of suffering, double standards, the double edged sword of social media, and more. I really hope you'll enjoy today's episode, and as always, if you'd hop on and leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice or give the episode a share, it helps us to spread the word. Thanks again, and I hope you enjoy the show. Today's show is brought to you by Icepod, finally an affordable, portable, and effective way to get the benefits of cold water immersion in the comfort of your own home. I opted for the Pro Bundle, which includes the Icepod, a water circulating pump, a special insulated lid, and a thermometer to check the temp of your water. Even in Georgia, the Icepod keeps my water between 60 and 70 degrees, and when I load it up with a 36-pack of water bottles that I use and refreeze after each session, I can easily get it around 50 degrees for the perfect cold water immersion experience. Despite being light and portable, the Icepod is super durable, and it's the perfect solution for anyone who wants to experience the benefits of cold water immersion without spending thousands of dollars for a home water chiller or trying to DIY your own. Cold immersion can help with recovery and muscle soreness, raise dopamine levels, help you wake up and be more alert, help you to burn more calories, mobilize brown fat, and more. Visit podcompany.com and use my special promo code SHANE50107 for $10 off your order, and each sale helps to support the show as well. Stay cool out there, people. Are you looking for the perfect high-protein snack that isn't loaded with stuff like MSG, nitrates, and sugar? Carnivore Snacks is the perfect high-protein snack made from quality grass-fed beef and salt. That's it. Each bag uses 1 pound of high-quality beef, lamb, pork, or chicken, salt, and nothing else. Aside from being easy, healthy, and convenient, they also taste great. These snacks are not just another jerky. They are way better. Give a bag a try, and I know you'll keep coming back. Check out Carnivore Snacks, spelled with an X.com, and enter coupon code SHANE05137 for 15% off your order, and each sale will help support the Renaissance Wisdom podcast as well. Welcome to the Renaissance Wisdom podcast, where ancient and modern wisdom come together to create a better way of living. I'm your host, Shane Sorensen, and each week we speak with successful people from a plethora of disciplines in search of wisdom from their own lives. Your own personal Renaissance begins today. Let wisdom be your guide. Hey everybody, welcome to the Renaissance Wisdom podcast. I'm your host, Shane Sorensen. I am here with today's guest, Katya Karlova. Sorry, I almost messed it up, but I caught myself at the last second there.
You got it. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, excited to chat, and excited to talk about the book too.
Cool. Thank you so much. I'm glad that we linked up a while back. I know I sent you a copy of the book, and I know you mentioned, which we'll get into today, I'm sure, that you've had a lot of health issues. So I hope it's been a little bit of a hope or a help for you as well. Why don't you just start out? Just give us a little bit about your background, and you have a pretty interesting career arc and things. So excited to hear about it.
I do. It's a little bit unique. So I am Katya. I started modeling about a year ago. It was a passion of mine. That's something I always wanted to pursue, but I had a corporate career that I had been pursuing for a really long time. There were certain goals that I wanted to hit for myself, and actually when COVID happened, it was a time of personal reflection for me. And I think when I used that time, I think everyone used that time differently, but for me, I was like, great, this is a time, if any time for personal reflection, it's going to be right now. I mean, I'm here, there's nowhere to go. I can kind of think about myself and look inward. And one of the things that I had always struggled with was body confidence and my own body image. And I know that's one of the things that we connected on, and sort of how your appearance plays into your life. And one of the things I'd always wanted to do was model, and I was like, I'm just gonna go for it. I know I have a professional career, and the other thing about me is I went to UCLA. So I was born in Moldova, emigrated to the U.S. as a child, went to UCLA, went to graduate school at University College London. So I'd had a career doing public speaking actually, and then kind of working in the talent space, and I love that, and I still love that to this day. But one of the things I wanted to do was really work on my body image and prove to myself this is something that I could do. And I think something that's always been important to me is like personal development, and that's what modeling was for me. And I think I also part of it for me was also like making a point that you can do both. You don't have to be, society might want to tell you you can be in this box or you can be in that box, especially as a woman. And I was like, I don't really buy into that. So um, I'm just going to do what I want to do. And that's something that was important to me. And so I started doing modeling and kind of telling my story and working with brands and doing something that fulfilled me creatively, which is something that I didn't really have in my so much, I think, in my professional life. That's kind of me in a nutshell, I think.
Okay. And I know like something that probably that you touched on a little bit that maybe we can delve into a little bit more is like, I know that, obviously you have like the master's degree from UCLA. You've done the speaking. I know that you were like a corporate executive. Are that something you're still doing as well? Okay. So
Yep,
something
I
I'm
do.
interested
I do
in,
both.
yeah, is as you mentioned, like kind of breaking down, I guess the barrier between that, because typically, especially like especially for women, I think we have a lot of like boxes that we expect like women to fit into, and it's like, okay, you're either like the really professional like business woman, or you're
Hmm.
like another type of woman. And
Yeah.
it sounds like something that you wrestled with was kind of the idea of like, okay, I'm going to break down this boundary and I'm going to embrace my femininity and get into modeling and things like that, but also continue to be like this like high power executive in a business situation also.
Yeah, I think that that's the best way to break down a barrier is to do it. That's the thing is like I think people spend so much time uh like thinking about, well, did someone else do it, or can I do it, or can I not do it? And I think the best way is just to start, start whatever that thing is that you want to do. And I didn't, kind of start out like being like, oh, I want to make a point, or like, be really preachy about this. It's really more like something that I wanted to do, and if that was going to be an example for other people at the same time, great. Then that's great. But to be honest, like it was just for selfish reasons, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think that like um wanting to improve yourself and your own mental health, there's anything wrong with that. And I know for me, it was a lot of it was about kind of mental health, because I do think that society kind of tells you that like you can either be this really buttoned up corporate woman, or you're this kind of woman. It's like the Madonna horror complex. It sort of plays out
Hmm.
in every aspect of society. And I just think that's really unfair. I don't understand I don't see any reason why you can't do both, other than like some kind of um, antiquated stereotypes, or some kind of preconceived notions about what women should or shouldn't be. And I don't really know why someone else would get to decide that other than the person. So I think as long as like you're doing your job and you're doing a good job at that, and you want to pursue a passion, I don't think it's any different than like someone who has a side hustle, baking cupcakes or painting, or doing something else. I think if someone has a goal and a passion that they want to pursue, do it. Like there's no there's no reason, I think, why we need to like our I think I spent a long big chunk of my life believing that like my life was work. And it's very common in America,
Hmm.
right? Like we get
Yeah.
into that mindset, like we are our jobs. And I don't think, well, for me, I can at least speak for myself, like that wasn't going to lead me to being like a happy person as a whole. And I think like the only thing we can do in this life is like search for happiness for ourselves. And I wasn't going to find it just being a corporate executive.
Yeah, I really agree with that. There's like the cliche when you're at a party and
Yeah.
you're like at a dinner party and you're meeting new people and oh, so like what do you do? As if like it's just assumed like this is who you are, right?
Yep.
And I still feel this way, but I really felt this way 9 years ago when I was a nurse because I hated nursing. Like I did not want to think about being a nurse.
Yeah.
I didn't want to like I could not wait for the time that like my shift would end and I could just go home and forget about being a nurse for 5 days because I worked like 2 shifts a week and I just take the rest of the time off. And
That's so
yeah, I think
good.
there really is that idea, especially in America, right? Like you go to school, you get
Yes.
a degree, you
Hmm.
get this job, and then like you get out and you get the job, and then you just kind of made it. Like that's who you're
Yeah.
expected to be forever. Like this was my degree, this is how I've defined myself in my life, and yeah, that's it's like a really limiting way to kind of view yourself in the world in general, right? To see yourself only
Yeah.
through the lens of like what you do for work.
Well, exactly. And it doesn't lead, you know, and I think I say this like backed with data, like it doesn't lead to happiness. Like people are not necessarily like fulfilled, or we wouldn't have like the amount of people experiencing like burnout or mental health issues, like right, like chronically stressed because of their job,
Hmm.
and especially because like they feel like they are their job, right? And like that's not who you are, right? That's what you do to make money, right? That's not necessarily who you are. And I love like my, professional career path. I enjoy doing that, but that's not like all of who I am. And I do think it
Right.
is more of an American mindset to be like, what do you do? It's not, I think I realize like working with different cultures, it's not as common, like I think in Europe, to like define people by necessarily like what they do professionally. But in America,
Sure.
we definitely like to put, like, put people in neat little boxes, and then maybe that makes it life easier for us.
Yeah. And like maybe part of it too, I think is everything is just so corporatized in
Yeah.
America too. And I work like my day job, I partially own and manage like a chain of gyms here in Atlanta. And I work closely with the owners, so it's not a big corporate thing. It's like I have a little bit
Yeah.
of ownership. I've helped them build the business and grow the business. And again, like you, I really like what I do. As far as working a
Yeah.
job for someone else, I could never imagine doing anything other than what I do.
Right.
um, but at the end of the day, right, like I think their experience being the people that actually started it and have like the vast majority of like ownership in it, their experience of the business is different than my experience of the business,
Yeah.
which is essentially it's like their baby, and it's like I'm like the nanny of their baby, right? Like I care
Yeah.
about the baby, I grew up with the baby, like I have love for the baby, I have love for them, but it's a different experience. And that's even me being more connected than like you're an Amazon warehouse worker and you're just
Right.
stuffing things into this box for like 8 hours a day and you just get a check at the end of the week. And it's very different than being an artisan, like if you were back in the Renaissance days or something and you were
Exactly.
a blacksmith. And then I think it makes a little bit more sense to identify and have that be part of your identity, because it's this like this craft, this skill, this thing that you've developed, and it's yours,
Yeah.
it's part of who you are, versus a function that you fulfill to make a entity make more money so that some of it can trickle down to you.
Exactly. And I think that's changing. I do think we've seen like a change in people's idea of what work is. Like I think that
Hmm.
definitely the pandemic did shift, because it showed a lot of people
Yeah.
that work can be done from home. So I think a lot of people have sort of the paradigm has shifted, right? The worker does have, I think, more power probably than ever to sort of say, no, like these are my boundaries. Like, no, I'm not going to work, 90 hours a week. I'm not going to do that anymore. And I think we are seeing shifts. It's just, for me, that shift was wanting to pursue a passion, which I think, um, you know, I I I hope that more people do that. I mean, I think that there's no reason. I think there's no reason not to, other than, and I think this was a barrier for me, though. I remember thinking, like, well, what if, what are people going to think? Of course you think that,
Mm-hmm.
no one's immune to that. And I think you just have to get to a point where you're like, well, it doesn't really matter, right? Like, are you going to choose what other people think over your own um, potential happiness? I hope not.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's like you said earlier, right? It's just there a lot of times there are these all these barriers that we imagine to something, and
Yeah,
we imagine all this like backlash and all this judgment that's going to happen if we do something, and then you actually just do it and you realize that like so many of your fears were completely unfounded, and like most people don't really care that much. Like of course there's going to be some haters that
yeah.
want to talk because they feel bad that they didn't accomplish something, but you know, I find that at the end of the day, most people are pretty self-concerned and they're not really too worried about what you're doing.
It's really funny that you say that. I said that to a good friend of mine yesterday. She was at a work function, and she was just kind of like having bad anxiety, and she's like, well, what are people going to think if I leave, and I was like, no one cares. Actually,
Yeah,
frankly,
yeah,
everyone is really more concerned with themselves. So I actually guarantee you that most people will, A, not notice, or B, not care. Like,
yeah,
and that's I think a freeing thought to get to, because you do sort of think like everyone's paying attention to me and what I'm doing, and you know what, most of the time people aren't. And you know what, good, they should be. Worry about yourself. Like, I think that the part that I had to get to was like, don't really care. There are people who I care what they think, of course. People who I respect, I do care, what their opinions are. But those are the kind of people who are worried about like their own goals and their own development and ideas, and are not that worried about like, shit talking other people. Like, those aren't
right.
the kind of people that I'm super interested in, that relationship or their opinions.
Yeah, and those type of people like they give you your opinion or their opinion when you ask for it and you value it because it's like
Yes.
you know it's coming from a place of they're working on themselves, they're happy, and if they're giving you an opinion, it's because they're genuinely trying to give you like feedback that can be helpful and not just like shit on you,
Exactly.
you know.
Exactly. And you know what, but I would say, yes, like, there are people out there who, yeah, they're not happy with their own lives. They're not working on it, and they just would rather, sit and talk about what everyone else is doing. And those people can stay over there. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
really, that's not, I think, who the kind of people that I want in like my inner circle, that's going to help me, grow and develop and be a better person.
Hmm. So like as we're as we're kind of talking about I guess getting past like the ideas of maybe what other people are thinking about us or barriers and things like
Yeah.
that, I wanted to ask you specifically, right, about some of the challenges and barriers that you had to go through just getting into, the corporate world as a woman in general, right? Because it's obviously it's generally a very male dominated field.
Yes, especially when I was starting out, and in the industry I worked in, which was the energy industry, so very male
Mm,
dominated.
yeah.
Um, and I think that I do always, and I do still, looking back, feel that I had to work harder to prove, I think, my qualifications, or my like level of intelligence, or ability to do something. And it's interesting because it's almost like people would be surprised. So you almost kind of have to, like, with time you learn to use that to your advantage versus seeing it as a disadvantage. But I think when I was young, it was just hard. It was frustrating because I didn't have like, there definitely was like a good old boys club. for sure,
Yeah.
especially in the industry that I was working in. So that was difficult, like how to build those relationships with people that inherently, see you on the outside. And I think the only reason it didn't get to me as much as it did was because I'm an immigrant. So I always knew what it was like to feel on the outside, an immigrant that moved to the US, like, you know, not that long, after the Cold War, and that there were still a lot of those prejudices and
Hmm.
stereotypes. And so for me, it wasn't like super foreign to feel that way. So I think I just kind of was like, okay, well, then, I'm just going to keep going, or I'm going to prove it, I'm going to prove my capabilities to you. Because I think I was always very, um, maybe stubborn is a good word. Like I was always like, oh, you don't think I can? I'm going to prove it to you. Like I think I always had that kind of personality type.
That makes sense. And I tell people all the time. So I'm a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt. I've been doing jiu-jitsu for like 13 years or something. And um, people a lot of times like they see someone that is good at something and they assume that
Mm-hmm.
like you just like inherently were good at it. And I tell people all the time, like I sucked when I am not a like there are people who go in and they do jujitsu and it's like they've been training for a couple of years and they're really good.
Yeah.
I was not that way. It took me a long time, but because of that, I think I gained a deeper level of kind of like technicality because I had to focus
Yeah.
on, fundamentals. I had to focus on the technique more than I had to focus on just like my inherent, athletic ability or whatever it
Yeah.
may be. So I think sometimes like those weaknesses, you can transmute them into strengths, as you mentioned. It forced you to work harder and probably to think a little bit more strategically and smarter as you went into this, as opposed to someone that maybe just was one of the boys, the good old boys that was part of the
Yeah.
club from day one. um, you've probably been able to surpass a lot of people like that just because you've developed skills over the years that have carried you on.
That's a good point, actually, is like how to transmute like your, potential perceived weaknesses like into strengths. And I think that, I think you're right. Like, if I could go back, I wouldn't wish it to be different, right? Like I wouldn't wish that I, was sort of born into like it being very easy for me, because I don't think I would be the same person. I don't think I would have learned to work as hard. I don't think I would be as strategic. I don't think I would be as resilient. And that's like a quality that I really value in others, that I've like worked to cultivate in myself. And I think that ultimately, um, sometimes like we need things to be tough, because it does make us stronger and potentially braver. And I think it kind of leads to better outcomes. And I say that because one of the things that professionally I've had a chance to do is like interview a lot of leaders who are really exceptional at what they do, and a lot of them, I would say all of them, that are really like exceptional, didn't have it easy. They weren't just kind of like born into, everything being wonderful and sort of like had a job handed to them and everything was great. Like they had to struggle and they had to persevere and, you know, experience certain obstacles to become the kind of leader that they ended up being. And
Hmm.
so, and I think it also probably the kind of person that they are, not just professionally, but so I think, you know, that, your experience of having to work harder than just kind of it coming easy to you. Yeah, I mean, I think in the end that ends up being, it's how you look at it. You can look at
Yeah.
it as like, man, this sucks, or you can look at it as, okay, well, I think there's potentially some benefit to it being this way.
Yeah, it really is about perception and how you choose to view the world. And
Yes.
something that I keep coming back to and I think about a lot. It's like there's this like Joe Rogan quote from his podcast at one point, and he talks about, like you have to be the hero in your story, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're unhappy with where you are, you're unhappy with, whatever, it's like imagine that there's a camera crew following you around 24 hours a day and they're like documenting you on your rise to accomplish the thing that you want to accomplish. And that kind of having that like a empowered mindset of here's what I'm going through, and here's how I'm going to transmute it right into my benefit, versus
Yeah.
focusing on like the amount of problems that you have and allowing that to just kind of stop you from doing what you mentioned in the beginning, which is just starting, right? That's just one of those huge things that
Yeah.
goes onto the list of, why you shouldn't do something because, you know, I'm a woman, because this, because that, because this, and then you never take that first step.
Exactly. And then you sort of, and then you sort of sit around thinking about, the amount of people who, myself included, right, have like struggled with mental health, right? And then you sit around kind of being like, well, why am I unhappy? Okay, well, what would make you happy? Are you doing those things? Like it in some ways, like it is that simple. Like, are you pursuing the things that would make you happy? And if not, why? And there are certain circumstances, right, that could, make us unhappy. Like I mentioned to you, like I've been struggling with health issues. That sucks. That really like
Mm-hmm.
will screw up like everything that you have been working towards, like, every aspect of your life. And you can sit around and just be like, feel really sorry for yourself, and like, yes, you're going to have those moments where you're going to be like, oh, like I am exhausted or defeated or whatever. But eventually, like, you've got to just keep going. I think that there's, or at least that's been, I think, a common theme in my life, right? Like you do have to, sometimes you might have to take a minute, collect yourself, maybe fall apart for a second, right? But
Mm-hmm.
but you've got to move through that, because you can't stay in that space. It's very easy to like stay in like self-pity or, feeling sorry for yourself, but it won't, that definitely will not change your situation. That is like one way to guarantee things will not get better.
Yeah.
So
And
I think that's like a big lesson learned from my life.
for sure. The health thing too, like we really take our health for granted. Like I know people always talk about
Yes.
like how precious time is and how precious freedom is, and the money and to be able
Yeah.
to do the things that you want to do, but like the one thing that you would trade for all of that is like your health, right? When you the person
Mm-hmm.
that has like $1 billion and they're like in a hospital bed on their like they're dying, they would almost guaranteed trade like all their money, all their accomplishments, all their
Everything.
acclaim, everything, just to have health back. And it's amazing how little attention that we generally pay to that. Even people who are healthy, even people who like, I go to the gym every day,
Yeah.
I eat right and stuff, but I take for granted uh, being healthy, and that could just be taken away from you, and your life is completely different in a heartbeat, right?
And that I, will admit was definitely like my situation. Like I definitely, will admit that um like live a pretty healthy lifestyle. So I did take my health for granted, because I was like, I do all the right things,
Yeah.
um I'm active, I eat super healthy, like I don't drink alcohol, like there's a lot of things that I do right to ensure that I'm healthy, but that doesn't mean that something won't come and like kind of knock you down and throw you for a loop, and I think that I think that was like the tough mental thing for me, is like, because if you are a person who tries to do the right things and then like you still, have like a health scare, and I have um, endometriosis, which is just like a unfortunate, it's partially genetic. Not a lot is known about it. It's like a, chronic illness. And I think there's nothing that I could have done to have prevented it, just is what it is. But, I think that was definitely a big mental block for me, to like be like, what? No, like why do I have to deal with this? I've done all the things I was supposed to do, And then you get to a point where like, you just have to deal with it, and advocate for yourself and advocate for answers, which I think, one of the things that I've realized, and you kind of talked about like how you transmute weaknesses into strengths, and I think that had I not learned the qualities of like being able to advocate for myself and be resilient, it would have been really tough to get through this, because I think that one of the things about like this particular health issue is not a lot is known about it. It's a women's issue, so it doesn't get a lot of like, typically, not always, but most often. And so it just doesn't get a lot of attention. So there's not a lot of doctors who have answers. And, there's always still the dynamic, particularly between doctors and patients, where, a lot of times people don't feel comfortable challenging their doctor. And I 100% will challenge my doctor. Like, it's my health. Like, I'm paying you money to help me with this. So yeah, I am going to challenge you, and I'm going to push you for answers, and I'm going to like demand that things be different. And I think a lot of times we, especially like just the dynamic of healthcare, people will sort of do whatever their doctor tells them to do, instead of like seeking out the answers on their own and trying to understand like their own health. And then that, I think, can be like a recipe for disaster. And then you end up being like, very unhealthy on like 20 different medications, because people, I think, there's a laziness component probably, but there's also like not wanting to take accountability, right? Because you can just sort of blame someone else.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, we're accountable for it. It's our health.
For sure. And it's the, I think I talk about this in my book a little bit too, but it's like that appeal to authority that we have kind of learned to default in, because everyone is so specialized in society, so, like, well, I don't know anything about, I didn't go to med school. I didn't,
Right.
do this and this and that. So they must know. And we do it all the time. We do it with like politicians. You're like, well, I don't know, like the politicians must know what's best. But like a lot of times, at least in my opinion, the politicians have, corporate interests in their pockets, and they're not really concerned about like what is best or what is, just or what is good. They're just trying to make their donors happy. And I think that it is a mental laziness that kind of causes us to default. And I think a lot of it is just, it's not thinking for yourself. But as you mentioned, I think a lot of it is too, people just don't want to like, they don't want to put themselves out there to like think for themselves. It's just, it's easier, and it's easier for the ego to just kind of be like, well, I believe this because, Dr. Fauci said so, like just because like so-and-so said this, I'm just going to believe it, as opposed to like going in and doing any kind of, research for yourself, whether or not you're, a scientist or a doctor. So.
And I think exactly. And I think that, well, that leads me to my favorite part in your book. And then it's in chapter 7, and it's about the individual and humanism. Right. And it's about, and this is something that I have always, probably comes down to my parents, I think, ultimately, as a quality, but like, I was raised to always like think for myself, right? To find the answers on. And if you do arrive at the same conclusion as someone in authority, great.
Yeah.
Typically, in my case, not true, but it could happen, I guess, theoretically. But I think it's important to, especially when it comes to something like your health, like do your own research, like try to understand. Like maybe you didn't go to med school, but like, I don't know, like, don't you, I mean, for me, it's like, I have enough confidence in my own abilities and my own intelligence to know that if I really want to figure something out, I can figure it out. I can learn it. Like, I'm not sure I have the, desire to get to the, get medical school amount of knowledge right now. But I think when it comes to something that's affecting you and understanding like how it, works within your body, then, like, isn't it worth it to research it? Like, I'll research it to death till I understand it. Like, because I think it's important. But I will say that's a quality that I think it's underrated. Like people really thinking for themselves. It gets a lot easier, especially, probably the last few years, or more so. It's getting, I think people are getting a little bit lazier in general, right? It's like you have a phone, social media telling you everything. You need to know what you how you need what you need to wear, what you need to think, what you need to do, right? It's so easy, right? It takes courage to think for yourself now. And like you have to consciously make a choice that I think a lot of people they don't want to make because it's harder. It's harder. People don't want to do the hard thing typically.
For sure. And a lot of times, unfortunately, like the best thing to do is the thing that doesn't feel the easiest, right? And it's like the hardest thing.
Yes.
Like, when we have to make those like little small decisions as we go into anything, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, you going back to, the beginning of your career, right? Like, would it have been, easier for you to go into this like industry where there's not a lot of women, and especially like as you mentioned, like the energy industry. I mean, I kind of know a little bit about how that is. So I mean that's definitely like a boys' club. You got a bunch of like, Texans with their cowboy boots, like like out in putting their boots up on the desk with their rattlesnake skins, and like it really is a
Oh
club.
yeah.
And then um, you could have kind of like said I'm gonna go a different route, but instead you decided to kind of follow your own passion, follow your own thoughts, and go in and forge your own trail. And I definitely think that's something that's just lacking in general, right? I think like the human psyche much prefers to go along the beaten path, and probably always has to some extent.
I think so, and I think those are the kind of people that I think why I found your book so, your story and your book so intriguing is like I don't think there's a lot of people out there who kind of like I find it rare, and those are the kind of people that I admire and I find interesting, right? Like just decide to do something different, like think for themselves and decide to follow, a different passion or do something differently or um that are truly innovative because I don't think that I think that it just has become very easy, I think, to be intellectually lazy, as much as it is to be like physically lazy. It's just the brain is the same thing as your body. Like it takes effort to work that muscle and to think and to question and to challenge. And I think that that's something that I think maybe I always questioned authority though, according to my parents. But I think definitely it is probably one of the reasons like I decided to go the path that I did, which is like I want a model. Are some people going to have an issue with that? Sure, but am I going to do that anyway? Yes, because the people who would have an issue with it would be the ones that I think want to try to keep things the same. And maybe that dynamic doesn't work for me. Maybe it's not the best dynamic. Like I think we should be open to challenging and to having more dialogue than we are. Like I do remember even like now, and this was actually in your book, is like I think even just 20 years ago, it was a lot more acceptable to have conversations where you would challenge each other about viewpoints than
Hmm.
it is now. Like I think now it's almost too polarized, right? Like it's
Right.
become simplified into like good and evil versus, well, why do you think that, or why do you have an issue with that, like what is your concern, right? Like digging deeper, it's almost like become harder to do that maybe in some ways. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I do kind of make that argument in the book too with polarization and in general is that it's really interesting in this world of information where 60 years ago, right, like everybody kind of watched the same news, they read the same newspapers.
Hmm.
Everyone kind of had like a more of a shared collective consciousness. And with the advent of social media and just the way that information
Hmm.
spreads, that how many books there are, the access to information that we have, it's like there are an infinite amount of realities or kind of worlds that you can live in as far as your consumption. However, despite the fact that there's more variety,
Yeah.
there's more voices, we've become like more fixated on, as you mentioned, like, black or white, left or right, like good versus evil, as opposed to like understanding that there's so much complexity, there's so many different viewpoints that we need to have more of an open mind. It's like this information overload has kind of driven people into like a place of safety where it's like either this or that.
I agree 100%. I think that's exactly what's happened is like instead of the access to information leading people to understand that so many of these things are complex or they're nuanced or they're so multifaceted, instead it's almost like our brains went too much, must categorize, black and white, good or bad. And
Yeah.
I will refuse to see anything to the contrary, or I'll become like irate at the idea of someone like questioning my thoughts, which is, I think, almost maybe why it's a good time for like that inner work or that personal development, because I think
Mm-hmm.
I feel like maybe I'm trying to think when I was dealing, probably like 10 years ago, I think I would find that it was more common that people would sort of like debate or they'd challenge or you talk about policy or, people would sort of have this like healthy debate with each other. I found that like less and less do people want to do that, which almost kind of makes you just go, well, then I'm going to focus on my own inner world or my own development. And um, I hope that doesn't last. I hope that's not a permanent societal shift because I think it's not healthy personally, but that's just, it's my opinion. But I hope that doesn't last.
Yeah.
Hope we get back to a point where like, dialogue about different options and more of an open mind becomes commonplace.
Definitely. I think it's very, very much needed, very much lacking in our society. And I guess like that kind of brings up one of the other questions I had for you. It's kind of interrelated is so like specifically for you, I know that you said that you had, like some like I guess some kind of body image issues and things that was
Mm-hmm.
part of the motivator for, getting into the modeling. But,
Yeah.
specifically like in your thought process or like as you're kind of like evolving, going through life, like, what was it aside from just kind of that like I guess that rebel spirit that you said you've always had a little bit that made you ultimately kind of say like screw the rules or like screw the way that it's supposed to be. I'm going to do this my way, right? I'm going to forge my own path.
It's a good question. I don't know if it was so much like one singular thing that got me to that point. I think it was probably um, a period of reflection, like during, probably during the pandemic, and like really
Mm-hmm.
thinking about what would, what does make me happy, what are goals that I have for myself, like what are things that I want to achieve, and really thinking about that, and then thinking, okay, well, I'm, if that's point B and I'm at point A, like how do I get to that point? And I think one of the things for me was like, you know, and I think a lot of it was, societal probably. Like in the former Soviet Union, where I'm from, like it sort of is expected that women be um, beautiful and smart and healthy and all of these things, and like this whole list of completely unrealistic expectations of perfection that like the Soviet state wanted, right,
Mm-hmm.
of all its citizens. And then I think there's societal pressure in America. I think like kind of when I was growing up, it was like, everybody was like stick thin. Like you needed to be stick thin. And that's just not naturally, what I'd look like. I could work out, I could literally not eat. Like I always would be kind of like on the curvier side. And I do think that especially for women who are curvy or, have like a fuller bust or like a certain body type, society just loves to stereotype them. They just love to put you in a box specifically that is like hypersexualized or oversexualized and like put you there and keep you there. And I think that ultimately like that just pissed me off. Like it was almost like getting to a point where something like makes you angry that like you were just like, I'm so sick of this. And I think
Mhm.
part of it was like, I actually had a job at one point in my career where like I had to, like, I was always so worried about being covered up enough at work. And like, yes, of course you want to dress appropriately for whatever setting you're in. Like, I'm not saying don't wear, bikini to work, Jesus. But like, I think, um,
Yeah.
but I do think like I always felt this like need to like hide because, I was like, oh, I won't be taken seriously enough, or I won't be seen as professional, and I was like, you get to the point where it's like, who makes these rules? Like this is like what people look like. Like you can't tell them that like the way that they look puts them automatically, or the way that they like to look, right? Like, I mean, maybe it's their choice means that they're not, smart, or they're not accomplished, or they're not, capable of certain things. And that's just bullshit. Like we can't be living in 2023 and that be the case. And I think that's one of the things that why, specifically, like I like lingerie, I like swimwear. Those are the things I like to model. Those are things I like. Like you don't have to be um but I think what's tricky though, and in my case especially, is then it leads people down a path of exactly my point, which is like, um, assuming that everyone has an OnlyFans, or they're in the adult industry or doing whatever, and that is
Mhm.
just literally proves my point. That like that's exactly the stereotype, is like people will assume if you look a certain way that you like are in the adult industry, which is insane. But
Right.
that's the stereotype that people go to. And it's one of the reasons like I'm so vocal on my page, is like, do not have an OnlyFans, do not do adult content. It does not exist. You will not find it. Stop asking. Like it gets me to the point where I'm like, don't know how much more clear I can make it. Like it really is
Right.
crystal at this point. Like could not make it more clear. But people will still ask.
Because I think like everything has a price, and they've just been conditioned to believe that like
Yeah.
that's the end goal, that everyone, that every woman that posts any kind of anything, on Instagram or
Yeah.
TikTok or whatever, that's the end point. And and that actually, like, that brings up, like, that was one of my questions that I had for you, specifically
Mm-hmm.
because, like, you're super super vocal about that. I mean, you're like constantly posting something like once a week where you're like, hey, don't have an OnlyFans, like this is just something that I do because I'm passionate about. And
Yeah.
do you feel, because I look at, like, you know like the spread of like porn and OnlyFans and things, and I
Yeah.
see that the way that and like Instagram is part of it too, but like I think that it's really harmful to women because they kind of get like an unrealistic expectation of how they're supposed to look, because it gives a really, like, you're seeing like the top 1% of all the pages, right? Because of the way the algorithm works. So you're seeing like
Yeah.
the most beautiful women with the most touched up, and the best photographers and the best lighting and the best
Yeah.
production teams. And you're seeing that, and you're an average woman, and you're comparing yourself to that. But not just for women, men are seeing the same thing. So then they're thinking
Yeah.
like, oh, this is how a woman's supposed to look. This is how every woman looks. And I think about the same thing with like OnlyFans. I mean, I think that OnlyFans is like really harmful, for men, and I'll say that from a man's perspective. But what do you
Yeah.
think about, like, for women? Do you think it's harmful for the women that, are participating in that stuff too? Or do you think it just depends on the person, or?
What's interesting? I think I have a very specific viewpoint on it that's very nuanced because of um so when I did my graduate work, I specifically focused on human sex trafficking
Mm-hmm.
because it's a really big problem in Moldova, like where I'm from. So where I was born, there's plenty of beautiful women with unfortunate financial circumstances who fall prey to traffickers. So it's something that like I have researched. I have interviewed women. I have interviewed sex workers at brothels in London, like conducting research for the National Health Service, because I speak Russian, to understand, right, like the journey, right, how someone sort of ends up there. Whether OnlyFans is inherently good or bad depends on the person and depends on their circumstances. Like I think if a woman, finds it empowering, then I think that's great. I think that whatever the individual, person feels about it, that's good. I do think though that there is, I think, it's not even really a fine line, which is why I don't think I don't understand how it gets confusing for people. There is modeling and there is sex work. They are different things.
Right.
They are not close in my mind. Like they are like, if you partner with a brand to showcase what, for example, lingerie will look like on someone of my size, right? That is very different than like exchange of of money for something, right?
Right.
And I think that, and I want to be careful in how I phrase this because it is such a touchy subject, but
Sure.
I think to me, like, I do not wish to confuse the two. I think they are different, and like for me, it's strange that I think a lot of people assume like if you are a model, like, and you model like lingerie, that means that you know do this. They're not the same. They're very different. Like like they're the Victoria's Secret models or other big brand models. They're not. You don't.
You don't go to their
They're not the
OnlyFans.
same.
Yeah.
Right. You don't, and they're not the same. And
Right.
so I think that so I think that that's one thing because it is, and the history of it, like it is a hub for people who that is their profession to make money. And I think that if that is their chosen profession, I do not have an issue with it. Like there's no I'm not a judgmental person whatsoever. Like if that's your path, like live free, do whatever. But I am very mindful of it because I don't want people to have um to make, like, part of one of my points is that in terms of like embracing our bodies and women finding like the ability to feel comfortable with their curves and with their bodies, part of it is like that we don't stereotype them, that we don't automatically assume and put them in this box. And so I think that's one of the reasons I'm so vocal about it is um, I don't have one for the reason that I think that people would assume that there's like pornographic content, which I do not make, I, or will ever make, to be clear. But I think that people would make that assumption. And that I think, even though OnlyFans can be used as a platform to just like engage with your fans or give them like a sneak peek into behind the scenes content, because Instagram is, increasingly conservative with like what they'll flag, even if it's not sexual at
Mm-hmm.
all in nature. Like if that's, you can use it so many different ways, but I think that commonly people will make the assumption that it's for this purpose, and that's just not the kind of content that I make. So I want to be clear about that it's modeling and and sex work, or the adult film industry. They're very different things. And I do find that the people who I think find it more confusing, I think there's a cultural barrier. I think it is typically more because Instagram is a global platform. I think there are cultural norms um, in other countries that differ from America's, and so I think that sometimes people will see a woman that's wearing lingerie, and maybe for them that automatically means something different than it
Sure.
does here. Hopefully I've navigated that minefield successfully, but that was hard.
Yeah, it's tough, and I think the reason that it's hard is because you're essentially trying to like explain and deconstruct what we've been talking about a lot through the show, which is
Yeah.
the human laziness to
Yeah.
just want to categorize.
Yes.
If I see a woman wearing A on Instagram and posting A, then B leads me to the OnlyFans link, in the bio or whatever. And, obviously as we already mentioned, right, like things are a lot more complicated than that. Like even, when I ask you a question about, what do you think about like the ethical ramifications of, it's a complicated thing. And I think, and I talk about this in the book too, but I think something that we just like should be okay with is just sometimes being like, man, it's complicated. Like, I don't know,
Yeah.
there is no like right or wrong answer for one person.
Yeah.
Maybe it would be very disruptive and harmful for someone else, maybe not. I think we can look at trends in society and we can say that,
Yeah.
on a trend or in general, a may be true or b may be true, but you just can't make the assumption that there's like an old philosophy thing about where they talk about, the black swan, that you can see a million white swans in a row, but you can't
Hmm.
say just because you've seen a million white swans that there's no black swan, because the second that you
Right.
do, you go to some remote part of Australia where there's this really rare black swan,
Probably in
and it
Australia too. Probably there.
yeah, and it disproves everything that you've thought, right? So like, as much as we have to rely on inductive and deductive reasoning to say that I've seen this over and over and over, it is very like intellectually lazy to just assume that because you've seen something that it's always going to be that way.
It's definitely true. It's like and I think that is really the answer, is like it's complicated. I think that for some people, um you know maybe some users, even like, they might have an addictive personality, and for them, like, that kind of content might be addictive, and like it could be really negative for them. I don't know. For some people, it's not. They get to engage with their favorite creator, and I think that in that way, like, yeah, I really wish there was a platform where I could just like engage with fans and maybe show more like behind the scenes content that maybe like I wouldn't put on Instagram, because like god knows their algorithm might flag the fact that like I'm a woman, like wearing, I mean, I had a post flag that was me wearing jeans, so who knows, right? Maybe just
Yeah,
flagged for being a woman, because the algorithm does like tends to, scientifically, like it does flag women more so than men. Like you could be wearing like swim trunks and I could be wearing a bikini. I will get flagged more than you would, you know, 100% always. So that, I wish there was like a way to do that, and maybe OnlyFans. And I know there's a lot of people that do use OnlyFans that way. And I think that's great. I just think that primarily what people know it for
right.
is adult content. And I just want to be like really clear with people that I don't, I don't make that kind of content, and it's not for sale. Like,
Sure.
but I think a lot of people still will it's just, it's really strange. Like people will still keep certain, no matter how many times I tell them it doesn't exist. It just truly does not exist. Like they'll still search, ask, like it's just very strange. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, truly, like if it was there and I wanted to make money off of it, like wouldn't I tell you? Like wouldn't I
Right.
advertise it? Like I don't know, but it's. I think that is the thing, is like I just want to make sure to delineate that like there are like modeling and is different from potentially these other things, like
Sure.
lingerie models are not all um doing pornography.
Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with the with the industry or with porn in general. Like I think everyone has to decide for themselves. I'm not for it or against it. I don't believe one way or another. It's an individual decision, but I think that like for some reason social media has sort of like warped it into like if you like wear lingerie, then you must have an OnlyFans link somehow.
Right.
People have decided that, and it's just really strange to me.
Well, we have to realize too, like, even like in general, right? I think in general, very general terms, even though I use social media frequently
Yeah.
to promote my stuff, to try to put different things out into the world, I think that like in general, I think that social media is pretty harmful for human beings. Like, now that being said, while I acknowledge that, I also think that everything is a double-edged sword, right? I mean,
Yeah.
social media has also been able to produce a lot of good. It's able
Yeah.
to spread information, sometimes bad information, sometimes good information, sometimes information
Yeah.
that's not being shown in the real media is able to spread through social media. So it opens up a channel of communication. It allows uh, alternative views to be
Hmm.
spread where, if you have a idea that maybe isn't mainstream, maybe you would never find a platform or a voice on mainstream media, but on social media you can go in, and someone that was a nurse for 6 years that just started studying philosophy because he was interested in it is able
Right.
to self-publish a book on Amazon, garner a fair bit of support, and run a successful Instagram page. So it's look, it's kind of like the gun debate, and I have no idea where you
Yeah.
fall on the gun debate thing, but at the end of the day, right, like, I know people say it and some people hate the term. Guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? Like, a gun can be used for
Yes.
home defense, it can be used for the
Yes.
defense of your country, it can be used for oppression, it can be used for murder, just senseless violence, right?
Yeah.
um, Social media, right, the same thing. It can be used for good in the world, and it can be used at the detriment of the world at the same time.
And I think that gets to your point though that you talk about in the book, that is my favorite part, where it talks about like the individual, because it's kind of like what you said, right? People do, individuals do, right? They make the decision. But I think that the issue is like less and less people, I think, value themselves as individuals, right? And like their
Hmm.
own, you know, their own journey and their own opinions, right? Of what they think, and like really becoming, being free thinkers and thinking for themselves. And so I think that in a way, social media can be used for good or bad. It depends on us. But it sort of is a barometer, I think, in some ways, for like kind of where society is, like where most people are as individuals. Are they choosing to be like, to be thinking freely, exploring different viewpoints? Because social media can be positive in the sense that like you could discover, you can choose. From one thing that I'm passionate about, right, is like body positivity and mental health, and you can choose to follow creators who are different sizes and different ethnicities, and really like surround yourself with diversity of viewpoints. Like personally, I love exploring and looking at things and people that I like don't agree with. Like I want to understand the other viewpoint. I enjoy that. Like that for
Hmm.
me is interesting. So it's like, but do we use this wealth of information to broaden our viewpoint, or do we just go like, okay, well then I'm going to follow everyone who's just like me, and then we'll all agree, and then we'll all be on the same page? Excellent. Like it it depends on the person, like how they choose to utilize social media, and like on a broader scale, I think. So and I do think that like that could be the same for a platform like like OnlyFans, like where you could use it. Like there are people on there who, it can be used to support your favorite like fitness creator. You could subscribe to their classes. You could do all of these things. And like, for me, like I joined the Playboy Centerfold platform for a period of time because I was like, oh, it's going to be something different. It's going to be something more like engaging with your fans, and you don't. It doesn't have to necessarily have like certain connotations tied to it. But then it quickly became very much exactly the same. So I was like, right, well,
Sure.
I'm out. It's not something I'm interested in. So I think that's the thing, is that individuals will determine like which way it goes.
Yeah. There's two little, like, quick side points I want to hop up. One, I was going to tell you should check out Substack. Um, so
Substack.
yeah,
Okay.
so Substack is where I'm essentially like launching my podcast out of.
Oh, cool.
I'm mainly using it as an RSS feed, so I can upload like my podcast to it, and then it basically pushes it out to Spotify and
Mm-hmm.
Pandora and Apple and everywhere. But it has some other really cool features. Like, it has a newsletter feature, so it sends out emails to like subscribers. But something you might be interested in is it does have the ability to set up like a subscription where
Oh,
there's you can set up tiers where like you could do behind the scenes things, and you can interact, people can send you emails, they can do comments, so
yeah.
it kind of creates your own little like environment that you can filter and control a little bit, and obviously you get total control over the content and pricing and all that, but
Oh, I like
I
that.
haven't
See,
been using it. Yeah.
and that's the kind of thing that like I think that um, OnlyFans can also be used that way. It's just it's kind of like what you know when I've posted about it, I've said not that I think the platform was exclusively for that, but I think people would expect a
Hmm.
certain kind of content, and I wish that like wasn't the case, but I think it also comes down to like time, the time it takes
Sure.
to kind of manage something like that and interact with people. And for those that don't know, a lot of times like the people you think you're talking to,
Right.
you're not really talking to them.
Yeah, they have like agencies where they just like hire people in
Yeah.
like Thailand to just respond to messages for like 50 cents an hour or something.
Right. And I think like exactly like for me, I think part of like starting this journey and modeling and maybe going more, I don't like the word influencer, but I guess like that route is, do you always want to make sure like I'm authentic? And if it's like, I think when it gets to that point, um, I couldn't like genuinely and authentically, have the kind of conversations that I think some people expect on that platform.
Sure.
And I think like that's like a boundary that everybody has to determine for themselves, like where their comfort level is.
The other point that I wanted to bring up too, that just because like popped into my head as you were talking too, we talk about like mental laziness and kind of like the
Mm-hmm.
default, and we generally default to the easy thing, right? And I like how you mentioned like you can kind of like your experience of Instagram, right? Like I say, hey, it's not Instagram's not good or bad. I think generally it's bad, but maybe the reason that I think generally it's bad is because
Mm-hmm.
most people default towards habits on Instagram that feel good in the moment but are actually like more harmful, right? So
Yeah.
the same way that we got onto the world, and you're like, okay, I can eat healthy or I can eat something bad. If I eat something
Yeah.
healthy, I have a delayed sense of like gratification where
Mm-hmm.
I don't get to experience like the immediate like hit of, dopamine and satisfaction.
Yeah.
So you eat the bad food. And it's kind of the same thing on Instagram, right? It's like it may not be as entertaining to get on and follow a bunch of people that are into like body positivity or people who are into like
Mm-hmm.
political discussions or ancient philosophy or whatever it is, right? um, but those are the things that maybe would not give you the same hit but are more rewarding and would actually lead you to having a positive experience overall through Instagram versus just following a bunch of like a bunch of naked women with OnlyFans links and following a bunch of like celebrity gossip and following a bunch of you know people screaming at each other about politics and fights in a
Yes.
schoolyard. So maybe that's it, right? Like maybe I really don't think that Instagram is generally bad. I think it's maybe that like our focus or the place that we put our efforts and our attention into tend to gravitate us towards like more of the negative as opposed to like the things that allow us to flourish as human beings.
Yep. It depends on the individual. Like I think for
Yeah.
me, so in full transparency, like before I became, I started like modeling and really using Instagram as a way to like showcase my work. And one of the reasons I like modeling in general is like I think there's a lot of creativity, and like a lot of the photo shoots that I do are like outdoors. Like I love adventuring, like I love rock climbing, like I love to do stuff like that where I'll be like, okay, you know what, I'm going to do a lingerie shoot, but I want to do it in Joshua Tree, and like
Hmm.
doing stuff like that. Before that, how much did I really consume social media? Truthfully, very little.
Yeah.
Before I became a creator, I didn't like and I know like I would, one of my closest friends, she would set like time limits for her, like of how much she was on it. And I was like, and she was like, well, how much do you spend on it? And like, we looked it up and it was like 4 minutes, like a day. Like maybe I would spend on Instagram, which is not a lot, because I'd like go on there, like see what people are doing and then be like, right, I'm done. Um, but now that I've been on it more and more, I actually think there's like, it's actually really, it can actually be really cool because I think you can follow, like I in addition to ancient philosophy, I also like archaeology and like a lot of sort of alternative like theories on history and like things like that, like really diving into that. So I follow a lot of those kind of things, and so that's like some of the stuff that pops up on my feed where I'll be like, whoa, they discovered like new Mayan ruins, like where, like and I don't know if necessarily I would get that news otherwise if I
Right.
wasn't following like that account, right? I wouldn't necessarily find out about like this cool new place that I want to travel to if I wasn't, you know, getting an alert about it or like following an account that highlights like cool places to go in Belize or something like that.
Yeah. And I guess that's the thing about the algorithm is it just gives you more of what you want. So
Yeah.
if you're seeking that like dopamine hit, you're seeking like that like entertainment in, the lowest form of the word, then that's
Yeah.
what it's going to feed you. But if you're looking for things that are, if you go on Instagram and you search nothing but, self-help videos for a couple days, that the algorithm will start to feed you more of what you're looking for. So yeah. I know this like intuitively, but I haven't really like sat down and thought about its larger implications, but it definitely makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think the algorithm though is inherently flawed.
Hmm.
So there's also that part of it. And that's like one of the things that I was like really in particular like frustrated about um, a couple weeks ago where like when I talked to like CNBC, because I was like, I'm so annoyed at how the algorithm will like categorize things in a way that is like inherently like stereotyping women. Like it literally does that. And it's so it's kind of like that it doesn't have the nuance of a human being to understand that something is complex, right? Like it just
Sure.
automatically says like wearing, female, like wearing less than, XYZ, like is, sexual. And I think that like I hope that as a society we can be more advanced about what is sexual content and what isn't. I
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah. I would say that, like with all the stuff that's happening in AI right now, it might get
Yeah,
it might get worse because it seems like as
probably.
like as time goes on, it seems that we're going to be outsourcing more and more to AI, which
Yeah.
seems only capable of like at least right now kind of operating in the parameters that people set for it. So um,
Which is interesting because right, like we're talking about this whole thing, and the whole reason I started this is because I was like, I didn't like the way that society puts women in these boxes, and maybe AI will just do it. Will just do it for us. I don't
yeah,
know. I'm not super optimistic, but I think that that was the whole point was like in for me in trying to show like explore different aspects of myself and like and kind of show that maybe a woman, or not maybe, but that a woman can look this way, be these things, and should feel empowered to like embrace their body. And also that like you don't and I do follow a lot of other kind of creators similar to myself who kind of talk about this, like a woman is not worth more or less based on like what she's wearing. And I do think that that is like
hmm,
the other aspect of it is you know um if you're wearing a bikini or you're modeling a bikini, doesn't make you inherently like deserving of less like respect in how you're treated than someone who's wearing you know long sleeves and jeans.
right.
and I hope that, you know, human beings can differentiate that, but maybe AI can't. I don't know.
I do think I mean, it's definitely a good point, right? I think just summing up again, what I think we keep coming back to is just this idea that we need to classify, right? And we need more free thinking. We need more ability as human beings
Yeah.
to look at things, to identify that they're complicated, to look at someone, not necessarily jump to conclusions or assumptions based on the way they look or what their career is or
Yeah.
you know what they're wearing. um, you know, these things are not what makes up a human being. um,
Yeah, those are the things that make up an AI. And I like that's
yeah,
the question is like, aren't we better than an AI? I would hope, but
right.
I, you know, I'm just gonna leave it at that. I hope, you know, and I think that like that is um sort of like my point in all this is like, you know, I hope that people can be a fan and follow along like my journey and enjoy, you know, photo shoots and, you know, be interested in the like in the brands or like the point and the mission of like hopefully other women will maybe see that like they don't have to, you know, hide their bodies or feel like ashamed that they have curves or like a fuller bust or feel uncomfortable with the way that they look because, you know, they don't have to like think twice before, you know, oh, is it okay if I like wear a bikini, or am I automatically going to be like treated a certain way? um I mean, I think, I hope that it makes a difference, but I'm a cautious optimist, I think.
I'm with you, and I think that's a good place to kind of leave the whole conversation too. Is just like is hope, right? As I talked about in, you know, my book, like there's this spirit, this like this human
Mm-hmm.
spirit, this ingenuity, the ability for us to survive, and you know all the things that as a species we've gone through and overcome and found solutions for. I think that, you know, it is very easy to focus on, you know, negatives, but I do think that, you know, collectively we've always persisted, even when things have looked at their worst. And I think that
Yeah.
I'm sure that we will figure out the biggest answers, right, that we can at some point.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed.
I want to hop into the section now, you know, where we kind of talk about just, you know, I have like these set questions that I like to ask all my
Oh, great.
guests. Um, I would like to ask first, so, and we've talked about this a little bit, so you know, maybe you're going to repeat it a little bit, or you can just say, "Hey, we've already kind of covered it." But you know, most people that have been successful at something, have done anything worth of note, you know, they experienced a moment, and you know, you talked about kind of like self reflection, right? You hit a wall, you hit a rock bottom, you experience a big failure or setback. It causes you to look within. It causes you to make a shift within yourself, and it creates kind of like a personal renaissance for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I was curious, you know, if there's any moments like that in your life, like maybe one in particular that stands out that was particularly transformative and meaningful for you in your journey.
Yeah, I mean, uh I've had a lot of those kind of moments because I have had like kind of a interesting life. So you kind of like, you know, lived abroad, done some interesting things. And I think, but probably the most significant and like relevant here was just, you know, when you have this sort of, you know, circumstances like COVID, right? Where things are literally outside of your control, right? You're in the middle of a pandemic. You do not have control over your circumstances, right? Um, what do you choose to do? And like when I have done a lot of public speaking and like in involvement with UCLA, for example, like I talk a lot about like you you do always like, things can suck, but you do always have the power to choose how you
Mm-hmm.
react. It's a really,
Yeah.
so you are never really powerless, even when it feels right. Like you are like, I'm completely powerless. You really aren't. because you always do have a choice in how you're going to respond to that, and how are you going to respond, are you going to react, like what's going to be your path. And that, I think, for me, it was uh that was a moment of like, you know, don't have a lot of choices. A lot of your choices that you used to make are no longer on the table for you, right? The things you took for granted, like being able to go somewhere, being able to do this, to being able to do that. And so it was like, okay, well, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to choose uh, positive things for myself. I'm going to work out. Like, and that was one of the things that I like chose for myself. Like, instead of like sitting at home and being like, I'm going to binge, you know, everything on Netflix, like I started like a really aggressive workout routine. Because I was like, I have the time finally. Like, I don't have that excuse of like, I don't have time. I got to commute. I'm tired. I'm this and that, you know? And like, I use that time to like really get in shape and like think about like what goals um you know, I have for myself, all those things that I had been like putting off because I was too busy, right? It was always too busy because my job kept me so busy. You know, well, guess what, you're not that busy anymore, you know, so you don't have an
Right.
excuse. And so like that was my like a big turning point. And like, what do I like, what am I going to choose for myself? Like, what do I want for my life? Like, what are the things that I value, that I want more of? Um, and like, what's important to me? And one of the things that came out of it was like, you know, there's a lot of things I've achieved, but I still like, you know, at that point, like didn't really feel comfortable with my own body. Like, I didn't feel comfortable. Like, I always felt like I kind of had to either like cover up, or like I just didn't feel the sense of freedom in my own body that I felt maybe in my own like intelligence or like professionalism. Like, I felt like a certain confidence about those things that I didn't feel about my body. And I
Mm-hmm.
realized that like I need to change that, because that's kind of a big deal. But I didn't really, you know, it's like in modern society, you're so busy, or we tell ourselves we're so busy, right? We don't really take the time to think about like what like to like check in with ourselves about some of those things. And so that was my moment to think about like, what do I want differently for myself, and like what is like, and it was hard. Like, it's not a comfortable thing to admit that to yourself, right? You're not like, oh
Mm-hmm.
wow, I really feel like shit about my body. Great. Like, no, it sucks, you know? You're like, damn it. Like, this is not good. It's like, it's uncomfortable to face those things. But I'm glad I did, because like, if you know, 5 years ago, you would not have found me like in a bikini on a beach. No way. There would have
Right.
been no way. I would have been like, that, I'm not wearing that, right? Like, much less like posing for like someone, I, you know, with a photographer or someone brand new, you know, in lingerie. Like, I never would have had that confidence like in myself and my body to do that. But it's, yeah, but you have to put in the work. Like, it doesn't just like one day, you know, you feel comfortable. Like, you're going to feel uncomfortable before you get to the point, you know, you're going to push your comfort zone before you get to the point. But I'm glad I did. Definitely. Because I think then that confidence spreads to like other parts of your life,
Mm-hmm.
which I didn't realize I was even like lacking in some ways.
Yeah, it's
It's a
just
very
it's
long-winded answer, but that's it.
no, yeah, I mean, it's just there's a lot of power in being in kind of digging deep and discovering. And look, who we are is dynamic. It's changing. It's very complex, right? I don't like,
Yeah.
don't like to classify myself, but when you can identify something deep within that is maybe
Mm-hmm.
more authentic to your vision of yourself or your concept of self, and you can tap into that. It's very powerful. It's definitely powerful. And I think that you're right that a lot of those moments, it comes from those like moments of introspection that causes you to kind of question. And I think it's the similar thing for me is that you're just moving, going a million miles an hour, busy in life,
Yeah.
and you hit a wall and you stop for a second, you take a breath, you look at your life, you look at your trajectory, and you say that there's something that's not congruent with,
Yeah.
who I am right now, the way that I'm living, and who I think I have the potential to be.
Yeah. Who you have the potential to be. That's like the really powerful thing is like recognizing that you and really believing it, right? Like that you do have the potential to be, do, whatever that is, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
why I talk a lot about like, do a lot of like boudoir photo shoots. The whole point of them, right? The whole purpose of them. People sometimes ask like, well, what does that even mean? What is a boudoir photo shoot? It's like meant to be an empowering experience for whoever. It doesn't have to be a woman, right? But for women especially, right? That might be like one of the first times that they feel like confident or sexy or comfortable in their own skin. And it's important to feel those things. Like, can and I didn't even realize like you spend your whole like every day in, day out, like in this body, right? Like this is your like vessel, vehicle, whatever. You don't feel good about that, then that has like a ripple effect on everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me, it's like that was the moment where I could actually like slow down enough to like think for a second and like recognize some things that I wasn't happy about. And sometimes that only happens when something forces us to stop.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's exactly what happens. Is there's something that forces kind of a lull there. Um,
Yeah.
so I want to ask you too about like daily habits. I always like to ask people about daily habits because you know again, not trying to classify everyone, but your habits are really, really, really important in
Yeah.
the legacy that you leave and the skills that you develop and the way that you live your life. Do you have any daily habits that you run through?
Yeah. I think like one of the most important ones for me um is, I'm trying to think like, by no means am I like advocating that everyone should do this, but it's something that like works for me. Is like I like choose like not to drink alcohol. It's just a choice that I made like a long time ago. Um, not because of any like issue with it, but because I was like, it's one of those things where it's like the it's recognizing like, is this habit gonna get me to where I want to be, right? And like, the time you spend like going out for drinks with friends and then like doing that is like, that's time I could have spent like working out, reading, like learning something different. The time you spend kind of like partying and doing whatever is not spent on like fulfillment or personal development. So it was like, it's more not so much a daily habit, it's a daily thing that I don't do,
Mm-hmm.
more of something like that. Like I just like I kind of realized, I was like, I don't think that that's like a habit that becomes like really I think a lot of people don't even realize like how much of their time is spent like doing that versus something to get them to where they want to be in
Right.
life, right? And so for me it was like recognizing that, instead of doing that, like I'm going to choose to like cook a healthy dinner, like, and I eat like super healthy. Like I got a nutritional therapist certification in my own time and like really learned the ins and outs of like what makes us feel our best, like what makes us feel like healthy and like what's better for my body. And I think that for me it was like one of those things where I was like, that's just something I'm not going to do. I'm going to choose other things instead, to be like, to be healthier. And that was like, it was kind of funny. Like once I made the decision, I was like, I'm just gonna do this for a little while, and then like you just kind of realize you're like, wow, no, I like kind of happy with that decision.
That's a good,
So it's
yeah.
like that's that's it.
Yeah.
It's my big one, I think.
I've just kind of always been on like the no alcohol train. Like I think like I can count on one hand the amount of times I've been like intoxicated my whole life, and like every
Yeah.
once in a while, like my fiance and I, like we go out, I'll have have a glass of wine, and I never drink. So it's like one glass of wine has me just like super giggly. And,
Probably.
but
Probably. Yeah.
yeah, but like when you never do it, I mean, it's just, I mean, I guess I take it for granted how much time I haven't spent doing that, because I just don't do it. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, and you're not very productive generally when you're drunk either. So it's not like you're just losing the
Right.
time that you spent going out and getting drinks, but you're losing that time. You're losing the time that you're like too intoxicated to function. You're hungover the next day, so you're not at your best. And um, it is.
Exactly.
I think it. Look, it doesn't have to be a harmful thing, but I do agree that I think we probably are generally a lot more productive without alcohol. Not a lot of good comes out of it.
I think that's my perspective on it. Yeah, it's like just
Yeah.
for me personally, like I just like don't see the like I generally like one of my daily habits is like I just kind of don't do things that don't have like any benefit to me. Like I just kind of choose. It's like I think the I have my list of things that are important to me, and I consciously don't do things that would detract from them.
Hmm.
Like, and I think the big part of that is like also like your eating habits. I just
Sure.
don't eat like a ton of crap because I'm like I'm gonna feel terrible, and then I'm gonna be like struggling, and I don't want that for myself. So uh, I think that would be my if I give a piece of advice, be like think about the things you want, and then like when you have decisions to make, like think if it would add to that or detract from that.
Yeah.
If it would detract from it, then don't do it.
I like that.
Seems
It's like,
easier said than done. But
yeah, it's the habit of negation, essentially. I like it. Um,
yeah,
I
I never
wanted
thought
to
about it
ask,
like that, but that's perfect.
yeah. I wanted to ask you too, about heroes. If you have any like heroes, big role models you look up to.
Yeah, I remember I saw you had sent that like that was one of your questions, and I was like, it's really interesting. Um, so okay, the way that I would answer this is, I do, but it's really more of a type of person than a specific person. It's like an archetype, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, of kind of like the anti-hero. Like that's the kind of person like I like really admire the people who are like the that kind of person, and it can be like female, male, whatever, it's just irrelevant. But it's more about the kind of person who's like a little bit rebellious, like there's a complexity to them, in terms of like, and they've like gone through sort of like trials and tribulations, and there's something about them that is like kind of complicated and nuanced, and they end up like sort of maybe doing something interesting, or choosing something interesting, or innovating, or whatever, but they're not like the hero. Like the hero is boring. Like Captain America is boring. Get out.
Hmm.
So bored. Okay. But the people who I think are really interesting is like the kind of
Like the Bruce
yeah,
Wayne
like the
kind of,
kind
like the
of like
Batman.
you know what, yeah, the actually a good example would be like okay, like would you choose like a Captain America or a what's his name, Tony Stark, Jesus Christ, I just blanked.
Oh, Iron Man, right?
But like that kind of character, like
Yeah.
your Iron Man, right? Like
Yeah.
who did you find more interesting? Iron Man, 1,000 times over. And I remember when I was growing up, like my favorite hero was probably Indiana Jones. He was the most interesting. Like that
Hmm.
was like an interesting, kind of character. Like I think those are the people who um I the anti-hero archetype, I think, is have always fascinated me, like those kind of people who are like a little bit rebellious, not just for the sake of like, being rebellious, like not that they're just like reckless, but that there's sort of a maybe like a questioning of authority, or sort of that spirit in trying to push for something different, and not just sort of going along with what everyone else is doing. So it's a
Sure.
type of person. So I think an archetype. Those are the kind of people who I think I've always admired, and there's probably a lot of them that I could think of. Like, I think a lot of like people who've like transformational thinkers have been those kind of people,
Right.
who like dare to do something or think something a little different.
I like it. The rebel kind of the person that's willing to take
The
the
rebel.
the untrodden path.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited about this one, all right? Because I know we were talking a little bit before we hit record,
Yeah.
and you're like, I've been waiting this whole talk. You said you had like a controversial recommendation, so I'm waiting to see what it is. Do you have two book recommendations that you would give out for, just anyone in general?
I would. I do. One of them's a long read, but it's worth it. I think one of my favorite books is Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand.
Mm-hmm.
But in college, pretty transformational book for me. Similar themes to some in your book about like the power of the individual, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that whether or not you like end up, believing in that philosophy, or whether it resonates with you, it's worth it to read it, just to explore the perspective, right? Because I think that was like a book that I read early on in my life, and it definitely had a lasting effect, just about like the themes of like innovation, of personal responsibility of the individual,
Mm-hmm.
of taking accountability for for our choices, and in a lot of different things like in our lives. And so I know that's a controversial one. Not every, I think a lot of people feel like a certain way about the book, or either for or against it. But I think, like, regardless, don't knock it till you at least, like, read half of it.
Yeah.
Like, I think that a lot of people have like preconceived ideas about, like,
Mm-hmm.
what they think the book is about. But it just, just give it a shot. That's what I'll say. Have you read it?
So I haven't read Atlas Shrugged. I have read a fair bit of her philosophical works. I've read like The Virtue of
Mm-hmm.
Selfishness, and there was one that was like a collection of her essays. And I'm a big Rand fan. Um,
Mm-hmm.
she's
My favorite.
controversial in general. I think that there's, I have my theories on why that is. I actually went
Mm-hmm.
into an episode a couple while back, but I think that one of the things against her, a big strike against her, was that she was a woman talking about philosophy in a male dominated field. And I think that
Yeah.
that caused her to, be kind of not respected a little bit. And they said, well, she's not a real philosopher and she's not a real author. And
Yeah.
I think the other thing that was happening a lot of the time is that, you had a huge influence of like the Frankfurt School and Hegelian philosophy that had infiltrated at an academic level, and academic philosophers tended to be more on the, I won't say communist, but like more on the socialist side, probably a little bit more influenced by the thinking of Marx, for example. And
Exactly.
she came along at a time when, academic philosophy was dominated by a opposite viewpoint to her own. And I think that that also caused people to not really respect what she had to say. And, I don't necessarily, I think that there are pieces of value from kind of both sides of looking at things, but I have respect for Rand for her free thinking. And, while I may disagree with parts of her philosophy, I think in general, I agree with far more than I disagree with. And I think that she doesn't get the
Yeah.
respect and consideration that she deserves, as a thinker in general.
I agree, and that's what I think. That's I think the way that I would put it is like, by saying that like this is a book recommendation. I'm not saying, you know I advocate and support 100% of all of Ayn Rand's ideas, but I do think that there's a big chunk, a majority that are um, definitely worth considering. Like, and I think that there are an interesting differing viewpoint that like that I really respect. So
Yeah.
that's one. And then the other one is, probably a book a lot of people read in high school, but that I've always loved, and it's like a personal favorite of mine. Um, a Brave New World. I've always loved it. I'm a big sci-fi fan. I've seen like every Russians in general, like Eastern Europeans, like are big sci-fi
Mm-hmm.
fanatics. Like a lot of us are. So, and my parents were, and I've always been like really into sci-fi shows, sci-fi books. Like, growing up, my parents like read like Isaac Asimov, like a lot of that sort of, sci-fi. And then, I've always been into a lot of. This is the third. I do love Lord of the Rings a lot, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
not quite like on the level of those two. But I think like I've always been a big sci-fi and fantasy fan, and I think there's like maybe some similar themes between like those two books. Like I think in terms of thinking about like dystopian society or philosophy, like there's
Yeah.
different like themes you can glean from both of them, but those would probably be like the two that have stayed with me, like really I think formed a lot of my thinking in
Sure.
my life. Probably those two have been the biggest,
I've
with
got
Lord of the Rings a close third.
yeah. I've got a Brave New World on my bookshelf. I'm finishing up 1984 right now, so it's like the first time I've
Okay.
actually sat and like read through. Like I read parts of 1984 in like high school many years ago, but this is my first time
Mm-hmm.
sitting down and reading it, and um, gonna work on a Brave New World pretty soon as well. But yeah, I think it's really important to see those like dystopian futures. I mean, like in 1984, yeah, I mean, it's like it's it's crazy. I mean, you always hear like, oh, it's an Orwellian nightmare, and you hear these things thrown around. But when you read the book and
Yeah,
you kind of look around at the world around you and you see like some of these things starting to happen, it is it's a wake up call. It's that like moment of introspection where it makes you hit a wall for a second and be like, whoa, like hold on, where are we headed as a society,
exactly.
right?
Well, and I think like what you'll enjoy about Brave New World is like sort of the talk about like categorization. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's like some really interesting themes there about like putting actually putting people into categories, right? Like you like consciously determining to do that, and that's probably one of the reasons like I'm so against it. Like I'm so against, like I would hope that as like humans we would be able to see individuals as more complex and nuanced than like actually like labeling someone in a certain category, which is what happens in Brave New World. So
Yeah.
I think it's like a, yeah, like almost like a cautionary, just like 1984, like a same kind of similar theme of books. But yeah, those would be my two that
Okay.
that I would recommend to anyone.
All right. And my
But
and my
no one
last.
complain at me if Brave Atlas World is too long, because
Oh yeah.
it's a long book.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
sorry.
Great.
Last question.
No, great, great recommendations. Good. And yeah, the last question I always like to ask is, if you could go back in time, hop in a time machine, go back to yourself. I feel like a teenage years are a good time point just because I feel like we're all kind of lost at that point. We're trying to figure ourselves out. If you could go back,
Yeah.
give a piece of advice to yourself, what would it be?
This is an interesting one because I'm almost don't know that I would. Um, which I don't know if anyone's ever answered with that. I don't know that I would like change the trajectory of your life and like the person that you sort of become. I mean, I wish I would have. I think definitely would have been good to hear. I don't think I would have believed myself, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Because
Mm-hmm.
I always had a strong personality. So I probably could have gone back and been like, actually, these things are going to happen to you and it's going to be okay. And you're going to do this. And I would have been like, I don't believe you. Get out. I don't know who you are. Like, I think I probably would have been like really dismissive of my future self. Um, but I think the, gosh, like the one piece of advice that I would give
You know
I don't
the
know. Probably buy some Bitcoin. Honestly, probably would have told them to buy Bitcoin. Been like, you don't know what it is yet, but you're like, you need to buy Bitcoin.
yeah.
Truthfully, that's probably what I would say.
Yeah, I had that as a joke answer before, but you know
Oh, did you?
the
Did you
yeah,
really?
yeah,
No, I would have said that.
the two most popular kind of like things that I've heard are um and this is the most popular so far is basically what you said, which is just keep going. Like just a variation of like it's all kind
Yeah,
of meant to be. Like just, don't worry about it. Like there is no advice I need to give you, just keep doing what you're doing because you're
yeah,
going to get to this place. And the other variation, or the other, one that's been as almost as popular has been, be more mindful of your time or just, like, but I think
yeah.
they're both kind of on the similar line of like, just, keep improving and keep moving forward. Right. Cause it's going to take you to who you are today. And I think that that's like the defining characteristic or maybe like one of the things that someone that's like happy successful shares is that they realize that the ups and downs, the goods, the bads, everything they've gone through has brought
Hmm.
them to this moment, right? And that you had to go through the things you had to go through to get here.
I think unfortunately that's the case. Like I wish I thought about it. And as much as like, yeah, there were definitely some real like, rough times that, I wish someone could have come along and said like, it's going to be okay. It's almost like you got to figure that out for yourself. Like it's not for, there's not a way that someone can make that easier for you. Like sometimes it just has to be hard for you to
Yeah.
come to the right conclusions on your own because otherwise I just don't think it works. I just don't think it'll work. Like I think I could have gone back and been like, "Hey, it's blah, blah," and I think it just wouldn't have worked. So truthfully, if you like put a gun in my head and was like, "Give your former self advice," I would be like, "Buy Bitcoin," and otherwise, just keep at it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been it. Because man, I regret that.
Yeah. Well said,
Still like on the crypto train, but wish I had done that differently.
yeah. You and a lot of other people in in the world are like, man, I wish I would have thrown like a couple $100 into Bitcoin and like been on a yacht somewhere. Yeah.
Truthfully, yeah.
Well, I have really enjoyed speaking with you. I liked learning a little bit more about like your trajectory and your career path, your background. Are there any links or anything like any projects you're working on you'd like to throw out there for like people to look you up or and I'll put links in the description too, of course. But
Yeah, I mean, I think I do have some projects, kind of interesting stuff coming up, but I am right now focused like 100% on my health, and I probably will be for the next couple weeks. So, in the meantime, if people want to learn more about me and like my background and some of the press and like the media interviews I've done, I would just tell them to check out my website, which is on my Instagram. It's katyakarlova.com. Has like a lot of different interviews I've done just about body positivity, about why I chose modeling, just kind of about the path, about my background, and otherwise, follow along on Instagram. I'm usually a lot more active than I am right now, but hopefully, once like this like little health stuff is over, I'll share a little bit more about that journey because I think there's some opportunities to raise awareness too. So thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it. Loved chatting with you, and like feel like we got into like some heavy like subjects.
yeah, that's the goal, right? Like like talking superficial or talking, that's never been something that's interested me. I like getting into the philosophy, the dialogue. So definitely enjoyed the conversation today. Thanks for listening to the Renaissance Wisdom Podcast, and hopefully you learned at least one lesson on today's episode. Our mission here is to uncover practical wisdom to create a better way of living for our audience. If you enjoyed this episode, please help us by leaving the show a review on your podcast platform of choice and by giving it a share on social media. This really helps us to grow our audience and to continue to add more episodes. If you are interested in learning more, please check out our website at renaissance-wisdom.com or check out the book that started it all, Renaissance Wisdom: How to Flourish in the Modern Day, now on Amazon. Thank you again, and may wisdom be your guide.